technologically driven voter realignments from FDR on radio to JFK on TV to Ronald Reagan through conservative radio and direct mail. But Pew gives you as close to a real-time look as you possibly can. So we are thrilled to have Amy, who is presenting new research that went live at 10 a.m., so just 2 hours ago. And this will be the first public presentation and discussion of it. I would note a few things. We're live streaming. For those who would like, there's refreshments right there in the back. At the end of this panel discussion, there will be refreshments, both food and drink, one floor below. And obviously it's live streaming, so it's open to be not only posted, but tweeted. We would request and encourage anyone who likes what they hear to tweet to that hashtag, and if you don't like what you hear, please don't. Amy, with that, I'm going to invite you up here.
Thank you, Bruce, and to all of you joining, either here or remotely. As Bruce said, I'm going to share with you data from our new report that came out today, but also much of what that report includes is also a historical look back to into much of the data that we collected about the digital role around campaigns going back 5 presidential election cycles, so back to 2000. So to begin to walk you all through that, if we think back to 2000, at that point, we are seeing the battle between Al Gore and George Bush, where at the time, we only had about half of U.S. adults, American adults who were online, only 9% that were regularly getting election news online. We did have candidates and campaigns that had websites back then, but much of it wasn't oriented around sort of day-to-day updates with news and information about the campaigns themselves. And so our analysis that year looked at what much of the news was flowing through at the time, which was a mix of your legacy sites that had websites like the New York Times, MSNBC, as well as web portals. Think of Netscape. Yahoo at the time, which was one of the more popular web portals. And their main features at the time was to aggregate news from several different kinds of news organizations. So we focused our study this year on selected dates of the primary coverage across 12 of these different sites, the front pages of 12 of these different sites, 5 web portals and other news sites tied to legacy. And here's a couple of screenshots way back when, the bright sites. Attracting your attention was certainly a focus of the sites back then. Linking at the time was still very much in development. 3 of the sites had no links to external news sites at all. 5 on their homepage only had 3 or fewer types of links. Interactivity, which was a big question about the internet at the time. What's it going to allow citizens to do? How are they going to be engaged, to take part? Well, 6 had 1 or 2 interactive elements, such as the most popular one at the time, in many cases, was voting. You know, just click here to vote, and that was sort of the level of interactivity, or maybe taking a survey. But we did also find that there was some use of raw video. So sort of capturing segments from the debates, for example, and just putting those raw through a link on your website. We then move 4 years later to election 2004, where we have John Kerry taking on George Bush. At that point, we had moved to 60% of U.S. adults that are using the web, about a quarter that were getting news online, 13% who actually said they were regularly getting election news from the web. And that put the internet at the time on par with your print weekly news magazines and your Sunday morning talk shows. So we did again study political homepages, and incidentally 4 of the 12 that we had studied in 2000 had closed by the time we went to do our study in 2004. So we were also still seeing ebb and flow of the sites and the web portals themselves. The sites vary dramatically at this point in their use of technology, in their knowledge, their advancement, and their approach. We had, in many cases, sites that were cramming as many as 30 different stories onto their homepage, because that's where everything lived, you know, for the most part, trying to get as much as you could. Navigation, especially on these sites, was often hard. There was a lot of pasting the morning's newspaper up on the site, tweaking wire stories to make it your original content. Wire stories made up a good portion of the content, both in 2000 and 2004. We were beginning to see more ways for people to gather additional information. So we did find these news organizations and portals beginning to serve another kind of role, which was to find additional kind of background information. 7 of the 10 had links on their front pages to information about the candidates' backgrounds or their policy positions. 8 of those 10 offered basic voter information. How does one know how to vote? Where would you go? What would you do? But many were actually still concerned about sending people outside their walled garden. That idea of bringing you in to my space was still very, very prominent in people's minds. 6 of the 10, and there's actually a little bit of backward movement when it came to being willing to send people outside. 6 of the 10 didn't have any links to outside news organizations on their home pages. 7 and 10 didn't have any links to non-news sites, such as voter.org or some of those kind of voter information sites. Information was often one of the techniques and tools that was being used was sort of the customization of static images, clickable maps with primary information. You can see this map here that was on the CNN site at the time was one that it's tracking where the different candidates went. So you could see their lines across the country, which they would update on a regular basis. So not so much interactivity, but being able to look and actually either see graphical kind of information or to customize what you had. We did also have some creative uses of new technology. This was MSNBC's Demo Derby, where they had the bobbleheads, blue or red donkeys, to let you know who was ahead at any moment in time based on the polls. So if you went to this one day, you'd see this kind of picture, then you might see them all clumped closer together, and then you might see Bush galloping ahead at a certain point in time. So 2008, and I should say that we did have in 2004, one of the elements that wasn't a part of our study, but was certainly a big turning point, was the use that Howard Dean had in ushering in the new era by introducing blogs to the campaign website. And he also sort of began that idea of candidates regularly speaking directly to supporters. That did not get him into the Oval Office in 2004, but certainly became a very major part of the campaign in 2008. By this time, 3/4 of U.S. adults were using the web. 29% got news online yesterday. Majority by this point had a cell phone, 78%, but we had not even begun in our survey work, for the most part, asking about smartphones. So mobile was still very much to come, as they say. About 1/4, 24%, regularly got news online about the election, and a little less than 1/4 got news on social media. So we're starting to see we had a big wave of blogs. They were a big part of the 2008 election campaign, and social media also really making an entrance here. 15 of the 19 primary candidates. So we did this study in 2007, actually, in the earlier part of the primaries. All 19 candidates that we were studying at the time did have websites. And so we shifted our analysis from the news media and the web portals over to the campaigns themselves as direct sources of news and information to the public. And we find that 15 of the 19 had blogs on their site, and the 4 that didn't had something very similar. They either had outside blogs that weren't actually on their site, or they had online forums. Romney had his that was run by his 5 sons that year. That was one of the techniques that he used. All but 2 of these blogs allowed users to post their comments. So it was a real beginning also of engagement with the public, engagement with potential voters. 7 of the 19 encouraged supporters to start their own blogs officially connected to the campaign. So that also speaks to less control of message. There was a lot more in this election that was trying to engage with citizens through a lot of back and forth that also gave some of that messaging, put it in the hands of the public themselves. We found 16 of the 19 candidate sites that linked to at least one social networking site on their page. MySpace at the time was the most popular, according to a number of different data points, as well as to the ones that, in terms of the followers for most of these candidates. We also had Flickr, we had Meetup at the time. Those of you that are older in the crowd will remember those. John Edwards actually surpassed all others with having 23 separate places for people to connect with him and his campaign, linked to through his website. Obama had the most friends on MySpace, still a small number when you think about the kind of numbers that we're seeing today. 400,000 at the time of our analysis, but that was triple that of any other candidate that we were studying at the time. We also found we had the debut of YouTube in 2005, and when we did we also did a post-convention study just of Obama and McCain later on, and Obama again was far surpassing McCain in his use of social media, and on YouTube had 4 times the videos, 5 times the subscribers, 11 times the views than that of McCain. And as I said, this was also a major election year when it came to reaching out for citizen engagement. As I mentioned, there was a lot of encouragement to have members of the public start their own blogs on behalf of the campaign or the candidate. 12 of the sites helped support and offered ways for members of the public to organize community events offline. 8 gave them tools to fundraise. All of them, of course, took money on the site, but then offered them ways to do fundraising offline or other ways online. There were things that were starkly missing. Only 4 actually offered information on how to vote. That, of all the tools that we studied, that was a tool that was the least likely to be found across these 19 websites. And one of the things that we found in our post-convention study of Obama and McCain's website was, again, the degree to which the Obama campaign was really taking this grassroots technique and approach to their digital communications, offering people ways to to make phone calls to undecided voters, and they'd give them sort of scripted messages that they could use with computer-assisted techniques at the time to do that, which was really something new and different. You could download flyers, you could download posters from the website also. And again, as I mentioned, with YouTube's debut in 2005, 17 of the 19 sites had video. A lot of them were TV channels. We had things like DTV, which was Chris Dodd, MIT-TV, which is the one listed up there. And he, at the time, had the most videos, 131, at the time of our study. Another popular video technique were webcasts. And Hillary Clinton used these, for example, around some of the issue pages that they had on their website. It would then link to something that was her standing there speaking through video about that issue. And we actually, that year in our research, began using 3D bars when we were showing people our data, so that was a very exciting moment for the center to show where we were. We did also find, though, that on these sites, mainstream media was still very much a part of what people could get when they came to the campaign websites themselves. All but one of them had a news channel on their websites that did have feature and regularly update articles from the news media themselves. So they were still playing a large role in the campaign's communications with potential voters. So we move on to 2012. 80% are online, 8 in 10 U.S. adults. 4 in 10 are getting news online, so not quite half. A quarter regularly get election news online, and that moved up to 36% by October of that year. So we were seeing sort of a pretty significant rush in terms of the growth when it came to digital. With more digital activity, we then also focused our research on the two candidates themselves, the two nominees, with a study that took place in June of 2012. One of the things that we found here was large gaps between the candidates in the use of technology. Certainly a more controlled message by both, but with outreach that did provide a personal feel to the relationship. So you can see here, Obama posted 4 times the content, received 2 times the political response than Romney did. And we saw this both in terms of the social networking and in terms of the website blogs as well. In fact, Obama averaged 29 tweets per day in the time period that we studied. And that Twitter activity still, even compared to the 2016 data, which I'll share in just a minute, it still surpasses where candidates were this current year. Romney did actually make more use of videos and pictures. He had 2 times of YouTube videos and 2 times of photos and graphics. He also used Facebook, tended to rely on Facebook more than he did on Twitter. But none of them used video to a very large degree. It was still not too widely used. We also find here a more controlled message, especially for Obama. He no longer had a section for the mainstream news media on his website. So that was a big shift, and moving away actually from having mainstream news media listed on his website for updates when it came to what was happening in the campaign. Users could no longer create their own blogs on the candidate sites. Although we did find Obama campaign, they did have a blog that was on their site, and a lot of that content came from citizens, members of the public, many of which were volunteers that were working in different parts of the country and posting blog posts on the site. We did also find that customization tended to be a main area of focus as well. One of the things that both of the campaigns had were state pages that were loaded with local information where you could do volunteer work, you could find out what the issues were when it came locally. But when you got to the site, you could choose to sort of join or orient yourself in the site through a number of different ways. One of those was state by state. Another was through voter groups, which is, this is an icon that came from the website itself at the time, where if you were a Latino American or a woman or a veteran, you could then choose to join and not only get customized information, but also be able to connect with folks who had similar kinds of interests or concerns that you did. There were also a whole lot of issue pages that went very, very deeply into the candidates, each of the candidates' policies and stances on different issues. We also did find, though, that just about 3% of the tweets actually retweeted citizens, and Romney just had a single retweet during that time period, and that was a retweet of his son, that his son had tweeted. We did also see that there were use of links, but most of them are still going back to the main website, links that were in their social media posts. So now we get on to 2016, and we know we have hit an era where both not only digital, but we have many different types of digital spaces today. Mobile and social have become a primary way that people are staying informed, particularly young people in this country, but the public by and large overall. About 9 in 10 American adults are using the internet. 8 in 10 are getting news there. 62% get news on social media. This comes from data that came out from us earlier this year. That number rises to 84% among young adults, among those that are 18 to 29-year-olds. 72% get news on a mobile device, and that's up from 54% in the fall of 2013. So that number has really grown just in a little over 2.5 years' time. 79% are getting news on a desktop, but when we talk to those that get news on both a desktop and a mobile, 66% of U.S. adults, more people actually prefer to get their news on a mobile device than prefer to get it on a desktop. So this use of mobile is not simply one of convenience, the data suggests, but is one that people really are beginning to prefer over the desktop. For election news specifically, some new survey data that we have finds that 30% are actually getting news directly from either the social media posts, the emails, or websites of the candidates. And social media, you can see there, is the one that is the most common, with about a quarter of U.S. adults that say that they have gotten news directly from social media posts from either Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump. And we asked about those two candidates in particular. So now the data that I'll share with you comes from a study that was conducted both on their websites of the three candidates at the time, Bernie Sanders included there, from May 1 to June 15th, and social media from May 11th to May 31. And what we find here is that there is overall an emphasis in social media to a degree to which, in some cases, there's actually less ability for the public to engage with this content when you compare it to what was, what's available now on their websites compared with what was available on websites in 2012 or even earlier. We do find in social media here, you can see that all three candidates are posting at about the same rate, but Trump is getting far more response overall when you see the public response pages. We also find that on Facebook, Sanders and Clinton, and here we look again at their posts over this 3-week time period, and we're finding that when it comes to the links that are in the post themselves, a very strong difference. So one of the things that rings through very, very strongly, just in that it's similar to what we saw when we compared Obama and Romney in 2012, is very, very stark differences between the way that the Clinton campaign is using both social media and their website to engage and inform directly members of the public, and that of Donald Trump. And in many cases, the Sanders campaign falls somewhere in between the two. And we find that when we look at their social media posts, that again, a very controlled message, where for Donald Trump, most of that ends up being linking to the news media themselves. 78% of the posts that contain links went back to the news media. For Hillary Clinton's campaign, she's much more likely to link back to the campaign itself, to one of the campaign pages themselves. And you can see there that Bernie Sanders falls somewhere in the middle. And that's, true when you look both at their Facebook and their Twitter pages themselves. We saw this same kind of difference when we looked at the content that was being posted in the news sections of their websites. Here we found on the Clinton campaign website that the campaign almost entirely bypasses the traditional news media or mainstream news media in the news sections. And instead, there are two sections. There's one that's called the feed and one that's called the briefing. And particularly in the feed, which is the one that's front and center on the website, what a member of the public will see are produced pieces which are bylined, and there's not a link to, you can't click on the person's name that's the bylined, but the look and feel certainly is coming from, and the production of it is coming from within the campaign itself. So these are news stories that the campaign is producing and putting into their feed that talk about different issues and talk about Hillary Clinton's stance on those issues, often as a part of them. I will also mention that one of the other things that stands out in that section in particular is the degree to which there's often Spanish translation. So a lot of times there'll be a story that runs in English, and then a few days later, another point in time, that story will appear as fully translated into Spanish. The Obama campaign's, the Trump campaign's approach is quite different. In their news section, there's actually very, very little original content. Most of what is in there are links and stories that are coming from news media themselves. And Sanders has a mix, including press releases as well as links back to news media. So one of the other things we looked at is who's being retweeted. And nobody retweets very much. About 2 in 10 tweets were retweets, pretty much for all the candidates. But one of the other things that stands out is when you do look at who's being retweeted, here you see the Trump campaign standing out very much for retweeting the general public. 78% of the retweets there from the Trump campaign were going back to, were retweeting members of the general public. And to the contrary, quite in contrast, you see on the Hillary Clinton campaign, 8 in 10 that are going back to a campaign account. So again, very focused there on sort of that insular control of the message in terms of what's being used. And again, Bernie Sanders and the Sanders campaign that had somewhat of a mix. And so finally, one of the other things we look at is we get at the way candidates are talking to each other or at each other. And you all are probably familiar with the different kinds of at mentions that you can do or references to one another. So we looked at the use of both sort of the official reference to each other as well as the just use of including the person's name, the other candidate's name, into the post itself. And what you can see here is that generally Trump and Clinton are talking primarily to each other and at each other. And Sanders is not very much a part of that conversation in social media. In fact, we found that when we look here, Clinton actually never mentioned Sanders in those 3 weeks that we studied in the mentions on Facebook. And so finally, I will just mention that with all that's going on and all the news and information, we had found earlier in January that 91% of U.S. adults had actually learned something about the election in the past week. This was back in January. And we now have new data that's just from June through the first week of July in this survey here, and we find that 6 in 10 are already worn out by so much coverage. So whether they're getting that coverage from the campaigns themselves, from the candidates themselves, from mainstream media, from a mix of all other kinds of media and folks that are serving as information sources today, we do not know, but we do know that 6 in 10 are expressing a level of exhaustion as we hit 4 months before the presidential election occurs. So with that, I will look forward to joining the panel and more discussion. Thank you.
So that was great, fascinating, with the only downside, Amy, of data that I'm otherwise really eager to dive into, that, God, do I feel old. So I remember every one of those campaigns, and at least as presented, they seem so ancient history. Now, I am a guy who's brought a BlackBerry to a 2016 event, so I suppose that says something, too. I am thrilled. We're really lucky to have such a great panel here. Besides Amy, we have 3 of the smartest experts in technology, politics, and media anywhere you're going to find, and we're grateful. We know how often you guys are, how many other events you have this convention, so we're grateful to have you here. Real quick, I'll do brief introductions, but it's a digital savvy crowd. You can find the full-fledged online. Sarah Fagan, who I don't know what hat you're wearing, because when you look at your bio, there are countless companies that you're with, whether it's Deep Root Analytics, Resonate Insights, TDC Advocacy, although I think they got bought, so officially they have a different title. But I know her as one of the real architects in the 2004 Bush campaign, for that matter, a lot of the political efforts both before and after that, and a very senior official, the political director in the White House, and a great Thanksgiving guest, if you ever want a Thanksgiving guest. Patrick Ruffini with Echelon Insights. There is easy to figure out who he is, because you're between 2 who you are not. And Echelon Insights, if you don't get their information, go check them out on the web. They are among the most creative and insightful folks in measuring and explaining what's happening for their clients, as I'm sure he'll get into. They do far more than letting you know what's happened. They let you know where to go and how to be most effective in targeting your outreach through the data and analytics platforms that are available. And Google's been known to do a little bit of that too, which brings us to Lee Dunn, my good friend for a long time, and for years one of the best Hill staffers, both on technology policy and everything else. Google was very smart after her decade with Senator McCain to snatch her away. And she's been doing a lot of different things there. But these days, let me get it right, is the head of industry elections, helping particularly right-of-center organizations leverage Google and all of the platform has to offer. I was going to ask each a question, but then eager to hear from questions from the audience as well. And if not, I will pester them a few more times before releasing everybody for food and drink. Sarah, I'm going to turn to you first because as we see all this great data, it also occurs that Donald Trump famously declared analytics overrated. And certainly he's been investing far less in digital than his competitors. Now, that said, it didn't seem to hurt him in the primaries. He ran against campaigns, including Ted Cruz's, that was one of the more digitally savvy ever fielded, and yet Trump managed to overcome what I would have presumed was a digital deficit. So the lessons of 04, 08, and 2012 campaigns were that the campaign with the more aggressive and robust use of technology won. Does technological superiority still matter?
I think it still matters significantly, and primaries are so different than general elections, and what smart campaigns do is prepare for close elections. And if it's a blowout scenario, your technology is going to get probably lost in the shuffle. Not that doesn't matter, but it's not going to be the reason you won or lost. But when you're in a close race, many believe Hillary Clinton has a ceiling of probably 51%, which I'm not sure is true, but it implies that the race will be closer than some analysts now today believe. And if that's the case, and you come up a few 100,000 votes short in target states, you're really going to kick yourself for not having put in an analytics and a data operation that will allow you to go find that extra 10, 20,000 votes in key target states. And I think that's the mistake the Trump campaign has made. If you think about just this last week and the vice presidential announcement, both Barack Obama in 2008 and Mitt Romney in 2012 used those events, those major events in the general election, as list-building exercises. Barack Obama used text messaging as a way to gather cell phone numbers. The Romney campaign used it as a way to Donald Trump did nothing. He sent out a tweet, but he did nothing to enhance his ability to re-communicate with people, which, again, was, I think, a big mistake.
Great, thank you. Patrick, I'm going to turn to you next, and just thinking about Amy's great retrospective. In '92, both Bush and Clinton they targeted swing states at the state level, and they used direct mail, major TV networks, and radio. And then when you guys were putting 04 together, you invented micro-targeting, and you micro-targeted key demographics. So it was at the demographic level, and it was typically in swing counties, leveraging additional channels of outreach. In 2016, it seems like the technology exists to target individual voters, that campaigns are going to go right at individuals. What do you see as the state of the art in using technology to reach voters where they individually are?
Well, when you're talking about a race to 270 electoral votes, it's still decided at the state level. And the idea that it's decided at the county level is probably a little bit of it was the best we could do at the time. But now with the analytics and with the modeling that we can do, we can probabilistically assign, a chance that, every voter in a state is going to go, whether to Trump or to Clinton. We can optimize our message for people who, are highly likely to support one candidate or the other, but are maybe not as likely to turn them out. And we know specifically who those people are. And we also know who the people in the middle are. Who are the people who are persuadable? Who are the people who are persuadable, not just on a standard candidate model, but asking on an issue-by-issue basis, who are the people who, might, where Donald Trump's, message to working-class voters may resonate, where that may have not resonated with Republican candidates in the past. And that's another reason why analytics infrastructure is extremely important in this campaign. If we believe that we are going to see a reshuffling of the electorate, where you see more college-educated voters may lean slightly more in the Clinton camp, more non-college voters may lean more in the Trump camp, then you can't just rely on the old targeting model. So you need to build your own, and you need to be able to have that as a key component of your campaign.
Great, thank you. Lee, let me first suggest we're going to have all of you back 4 years from now. Won't be Cleveland, I'm not sure where it will be, but wherever it is, when we have this event, and the question will be asked, what in 2016 emerged as game-changing, as new? You're at that cutting edge. You're seeing what the most effective organizations and groups are using that hadn't been there before, and that's really getting traction. Give us a preview of what you'll tell us 4 years from now proved to be game changers.
I think one of the things that'll come from this campaign is going to be that campaigns will run these dual campaigns where they'll invest very heavily and smartly in the data that Patrick and Sarah provide them. And then they're going to find that they also have to reach broader audiences, and then finding out how you run two different campaigns where you're doing something for broader audiences and something for those individual voters. Because what may motivate one of those individual voters that Sarah or Patrick can find might not be the same message that resonates for a broader voter. And so we're seeing sort of a dual track with some campaigns where, it's all about making the right creative to the right audience at the right time. And that's what I think Republicans are finally getting savvy at this campaign, on many different campaign levels, both presidential, but very much so in the down ballot races. And so that's been, but I think when we look back on this race in particular, I think what we're going to find is that this was the race where it was the mobile race and it was the video race. We see this year on YouTube, we had more people access YouTube on a mobile device than a desktop. I mean, that's just unbelievable. And what are they doing they're watching, they're consuming minutes upon minutes upon minutes of video on a 6-inch device. So that's just setting the world on fire. YouTube has more people on its platform every day than those people who are watching Dancing with the Stars and the Super Bowl combined. So it's definitely going to be the election where we saw the use of mobile and video more than ever before, and I think it'll change the way people consume, and it already has, media and deciding who to vote for.
I think that I agree with Lee. I think this will be the mobile election, and if you think about the big innovations in these previous presidential campaigns, both with what we did in 2004 and what President Obama did in his races in 2008 and 2012, a lot of times the thing that gets reported at the end of the cycle was really emergent. It wasn't that it was fully baked in the campaign or that it was more aspirational. They did a little bit of TV ad targeting in the 2012 campaign. They did it in Ohio. They did it in a few places. That's now much more fully baked in, and we're not talking about it, even though this is probably the first cycle that TV ad targeting is really being used, presidential cycle that TV ad targeting will be sort of part of the ethos of at least the Clinton campaign. I'm not sure what the Trump campaign will do in that regard. But two other innovations that I think will be those emergent possibilities, that'll be the emergent this cycle and more fully realized in the 2020 cycle, are much better time and location targeting. So it's not just that you'll build on what Lee said about doing very niche targeting to individuals and then broader targeting. It will be more that I think that getting a hold of Patrick or reaching Patrick with the message is best at this time of the day. And so that technology is more available to campaigns. And then the other thing is I think you'll also see very significant mobile advertising budgets. And you mentioned the mobile election, and that is where people are on YouTube and doing YouTube targeting. But I think you'll see significantly higher budgets just spent across all mobile channels across the board.
And I think the campaigns are, are increasingly going to need to become medium agnostic in terms of how they reach that voter. We conducted a study earlier this year and just asked, younger voters in particular, how do you primarily watch television? And a majority of millennials are no longer primarily watching television through live TV. And, we have a broad definition of what television means, but for most, for a plurality of millennials, what television means to them is Netflix, Hulu, YouTube, And they're watching it through a big screen. They're not just watching it on their phone. And many of those channels don't necessarily have advertising, or it's time shifted. So the idea is that we're no longer able, a growing percentage of the electorate, we're just no longer able to reach them in the traditional ways. And we are seeing, I think, online advertising not just being sort of this very highly targeted medium anymore, that it's simply the new direct mail, where I can directly address a voter based on online cookie targeting. But you're increasingly, I think, seeing mediums and platforms that are broader based in nature, that have the same immersive feel of television, but delivered through a mobile device. And I would say Snapchat in this regard has become a favorite, I think, of many campaigns who are trying to do this.
One example I'll give, just to back up Amy's research, is we attended a focus group by Frank Luntz yesterday of 27 undecided Ohio voters. And I know CBS News covered it, so some may see coverage of it this week. Frank asked those 27 swing voters, where are you getting your news and information on the candidates? And they said, is it television advertising? Is it your friends and family? Is it social media? Is it online news sources? 26 of the 27 said online news sources. I mean, people, and we've seen this too, people are consuming so much news and information about this campaign. We surpassed the last election's consumption of YouTube videos about politics in May for the entire election from last. But real fast, one example on mobile that I think is great to bring up here in Cleveland and bring up in Ohio is, and especially comes about with Sarah talking about what we'll see in the next election, which is time and location. I'll know you so well that I'll know that you like to receive your ads, hopefully, in the morning before your breakfast, because maybe we'll have candidates that won't make you sick when you eat breakfast or something like that. But, we had, for Governor Kasich's primary here, he had a series of 6-second, what we call bumper ads, that he did and put forth throughout the day in a sequential sequence. So I might have woken up and maybe I was watching a clip from my local news or CNN, and there was Arnold Schwarzenegger telling me to get out and vote for the action governor. And then, at lunch I might have accessed, something online or a news site and had a video hit me with Karen Kasich. And then, by the afternoon when I was standing in line at the polling place waiting, to vote like millions of other Ohio voters, and what was I doing? I was scrolling through my phone, I was looking at news, and I got another, kind of his closing argument, of why you should vote for me. And I think that's what we're going to continue to see, hopefully, in this campaign is time and date playing and sequential remarketing and building upon a message, all of which is going to be on mobile and all of which is going to be persuasive using video. So it backs up a lot of what Amy was saying.
Yeah, and I'll just, just to build on that a bit. We've seen in so many of our different data points about the, this growth in mobile, whether it's, the fact that in the digital ad space, mobile is now accounting for more than your desktop ad spending. When you look at sort of the ways that people are engaging with different kinds of content on mobile, we did a study looking at long-form news reading. This is actually reading, but it's actually engaging with longer types of content, and found that in general, people are engaging with spending twice the time with longer form content on their phones than they are with shorter form content. So there's not an automatic turnoff point just because people are on a small device. That whatever it is, whether it's watching something or reading something that's longer, people are comfortable, a lot due to the advancements in technology and the fact that it looks nicer and feels better to be able to do it on your phone than it did 5 years ago or even 4 years ago there. But we also found in our data something that's interesting, which was we asked people in a recent research project that we did about whether they prefer to get their news by reading, by watching, or by listening. And what we found sort of speaks to, I think, this cusp that we're at when it comes to the digital space. And those who preferred reading had very much migrated to the web. But we only have 2 in 10 adults that are preferring to get their news through a print newspaper. We have found that there are, the readers have really largely migrated to the web at this point. But those who prefer to watch, which is the largest portion of the population, more so than reading or going to the TV. Now, if you start to cut that by age and different kinds of groups, you see a lot of shifts there that are occurring. But that's where I think it's going to be really interesting to watch, to see when that video watching through mobile devices and digital in general ends up being able to translate across to it's just sort of the large swath of the public overall.
So this is a great conversation. I'll ask one more question. We'll take a couple of minutes if others here have it, but then minding we promised you an hour and we started a little late. I'm faced with a little bit of a conundrum, which is we now have a greater capacity to motivate voters than we've ever had before, to get them the right ad, the right information at the right time in the right place, and yet voter turnout's at a historic low. Concurrently, we can get more news and information and shared with folks, and yet we have trust in institutions and favorability of candidates at historic lows. It makes one wonder, for all of these great technologies that can inform and motivate, we have folks less motivated, and you can debate whether they're more or not informed, but less enthusiastic. Is that causation or correlation? Is technology part of the problem?
I think that's a really great question. It's certainly on the arc of history is not part of the problem. It's part of our innovative future and for our country specifically, what will help drive economic growth. Having said that, you mentioned that most Americans lack trust in pretty much all major institutions, which is true. And I think a lot of that has to do with just the times in which we live and the major disruptive change that has occurred on top of each other. So, the FCC chairman said recently that we've seen more technological innovation in the last 10 years than since the invention of the printing press. You take that with the economic downturn from 2008, the whole changing face of war around the globe, where you have these lone wolf terrorist attacks versus sort of very orderly, structured countries going into battle with each other. You couple that with the demographic change that's occurred. We've seen the share of the white vote in this country drop 18 points since 1992. You take all of that together, and technology is part of the anxiety that many people feel who are on the outside. We're all pretty plugged in by definition of the fact that we're sitting here. Many people are on their smartphones as I speak. You're all going to hail an Uber when you leave here and get back. Most Americans are not living like that. They're on smartphones and the internet more and more, but they're not as wired as we are. And that has been a displacing occurrence for a lot of American voters. So technology is definitely part of the anxiety people feel. It's also long-term the solution for education and prosperity and economic growth. But it's we're in a tough period right now.
Well, I have two thoughts on that. One is, algorithmic filtering is a big problem right now. In that, when I go to Facebook, or most people go to Facebook, they're increasingly seeing news that has been pre-selected for them based on the kinds of things they've engaged with in the past, the kinds of things they've clicked on in the past, that generally come from highly partisan news sources where people already agree, with their position, and people are getting mutually reinforced and hardened into these partisan camps. Where, in the 1984 presidential election, you could have a 49-state blowout. You could have a 20-point Reagan victory, and you could have, roughly a third of Americans considering themselves swing voters. That number has whittled itself down, and I think technology has become part of the reason why. Certainly not the only reason why why that number the number of true swing voters has been whittled down into the single digits. So I think it's part of a broader trend. Campaigns have gotten better in targeting. Campaigns have certainly started talking to the base of their parties more and tried to reinforce the base of their parties more than they've been talking to swing voters. So I think that's one change. The second thing is, the sheer volume of information is you go back to the beginning of the period, this panel looks at, 1996, there was just a lot less information, both on cable, on technology, through internet, as Amy has sort of, highlighted, didn't really exist as a news source back then. But we had in this cycle, the value of social media mentions was more than all of the broadcast TV advertising in the primary. That's just social media mentions. And Donald Trump received, on top of that, $2 billion in earned media. So the ability of, in the modern media environment, the ability of campaigns to control the narrative through paid media has shrunk dramatically.
I will try to end on a more positive, uplifting. I mean, because I do agree exactly with much of what Sarah and Patrick have said. But I will say one of the things that we say at YouTube is that most people go to watch videos to be educated, inspired, and informed, entertained. And so I do think it's incumbent upon all of us as Americans that we have these platforms now. And so if you don't like what you're seeing from the candidates or from the news media, put your own commentary out there. And hopefully it's positive. I mean, look, we've seen a lot of things online recently that have been really troubling to watch. But, then we think back to the summers of the water bucket splash, or, and those are the fun moments that you see online. And so I think, hopefully as a country we'll find more of those in politics. We had some candidates that did some fun things this cycle. I mean, Marco Rubio did some fun football, advertisements and videos that were more fun and funny and made light of himself. And Americans loved that and ate it up. So hopefully we'll see candidates that can be more lighthearted. Maybe it's going to be more down ballot than at the top of the ticket, but I think that would really help in people not feeling so nervous about technology and where it's going in some levels.
Well, I like and appreciate the optimism. It's Patrick asking the question of whether media, and this is as much as journalism and anything else, still informs as much as affirms, is an interesting question. But building on what you and Sarah said, it certainly reinforces in my mind the importance of the light touch regulatory environment we've seen from Washington that has encouraged the build out of the broadband networks, the build out of the mobile networks, the ability of organizations like Google and Twitter to be as creative as they've been in becoming platforms that allow folks to reach so many. And particularly, Sarah, to your point, with the goal of trying to make sure that no one is left behind from the digital conversation, be it in politics or healthcare, we really do need to maintain these light touch, pro-investment, pro-growth policies. We promised we'd be done in an hour, which gives me less than 5 minutes. I'm going to turn to the field for one question, so we technically will have taken a question from the audience. That guy raised his hand first. After this, these guys are going to stick around for a little bit. We're going to have drinks and food. So one question from the field. Please say who you are and where you're from.
Like some of this is generational. The fact that the Republican Party hasn't had a leader for 8 years is part of the reason that we don't have this embedded in the culture as much as the Democrats do. I mean, Barack Obama came in, was successful in 2008, and it became, part of the party ethos that everybody was going to follow this. So I think at some point in the future, Republicans will elect, will have a nominee that is successful in November and breathes this, and that will help. But I think, you have to just go in with data and the power of persuasion relative to, relative to the cost per, eyeball, so that people who put money on TV ads versus people who, do a combined effort online and through social media. I mean, the numbers are there, the financial analysis can be done, and that's typically, I think, at least in my experience, been the best way to convince people to allocate more dollars and more time and people in these, in these. Primaries are also tough because there's so few dollars and you're trying to just get through the next state, where it's really hard to build this type of program until you get to the general election.
I would say the state of the Republican Party shows that from what little you said, I can already guess what campaign you worked on. So I'm not going to out you here. We can talk afterwards. But I will say we've learned, and through the help of many people, including people on the stage and teaching us, is that we need to go in and stop talking about budgets with candidates and talk more about reach. And that's the biggest impact that we'll make with particularly Republicans. Because Republicans have tended to think of their media budgets very much as, I give this, I do this for direct mail, and I do this for, and in reality, we need to start thinking about campaigns just the way, and frankly, the Obama team did this very well. I want to reach this group of people. Let me figure out what platform is the best way to reach them. And sometimes it may be broadcast TV, sometimes it may be cable TV, sometimes it may be online, and it may depend on the platform even online. But I think if we can start showing the data that shows that this group or this audience is reached best by this platform, then we'll find the candidates saying, okay, hopefully the data doesn't lie, I'm gonna have to agree with you because I do need to spend my money in the most efficient way because, and I need to get elected and I need to reach these people. And if you're telling me these people aren't here, there, or there, then I'm, and so I think that's where we found our best arguments with campaigns is to have them start thinking about the audience and less about a budget.
And it's also important, like we need to, really inculcate, measurement throughout the campaign at the end state of persuasion, really understanding how is our TV moving numbers, how is our digital moving numbers, doing field experiments, doing things that prove out the value of each of these platforms. Because at the end of the day, the things where we see the quickest adoption of digital tools, of optimization, first place is always fundraising, right? Because there's net revenue positive impact. Nobody ever wants to do it on the spending side, or by the time we have time, or all the spending is so compressed in the final 2 months of the campaign that people feel like they don't have time to do it. Or, gosh, we have so much money to throw on TV that it doesn't matter because we don't need to be targeted at that point. So really careful planning, but I think education around specifically around what is, to Lee's point, what is the reach behind each of these platforms, and what is the persuasive power of each of these platforms through rigorous testing and not just assumptions. I did it in this primary once and it worked.
So we started the program exactly 1 hour ago, which means I will stop it right now. Please join me in thanking a great panel. And then everybody is invited one floor down. Lauren, is there a name of the place? The Bridge. We're all invited to the Bridge. There's food, there's drink, and there's really smart people to consult with, and we'll see if Lee is right about that great question and the campaign that you worked on. He said it was a Republican who won a state, so there are 3 choices. So.